All right, this is part 2 of the screencast on Thomas Hardy. We left off on the 4th stanza of our poem, The Voice. And so on the 4th stanza, thus I notice here that our poem changes. He's indenting in. We have a difference. It's changed. The rhythm is changing. In this last stanza, I still say the rhyme scheme kind of stays the same. The first and the third lines matching with each other, but it's definitely structured a little different. He says, "Thus I, faltering forward, leaves around me falling, wind oozing thin through the horn from norward, and the woman calling." So we got a shift in tone, we got a shift in structure, and it's focusing on the speaker's presence. Before he had been talking about reminiscing of the past and wondering if they were ever going to be together, and then this is now he's faltering forward, right? And you can even see that in the way that this looks like a misstep, right? Everything else has been left aligned, and now he's faltering, taking faltering steps. He's moving forward. Everything about him is going on. The leaves are falling. The wind is oozing. He loves the woman still, nevertheless, despite knowing that he will never meet her again. The falling of the leaves suggests that the arrival of autumn has happened and that maybe some time has passed, and he is continuing with his illusion, though, that he thinks he hears her calling, but we have that final sense of grief and emptiness towards his loss and his longing to, if he can't be with her here on this plane, that he can keep her alive in his memories. Okay, switching gears for just a second, we're going to talk about "And There Was a Great Calm," and that was not in the textbook, but I really like this poem. I love that it fits really well to these war poems of this time period. So this describes the horrors of World War I. The end of the war, it's dedicated on the signing of the armistice, 11 November 1918, which was called The Great Calm. Okay, so it's a 9-stanza poem. It's made up of sets of 5 lines. Each of these sets follows the same rhyme scheme, A, B, A, B. Okay, and just to kind of in short, this poem is beginning with the speaker kind of describing all the emotions which have impacted everybody. There's been a lot of anger. There's been a lot of fury. There's been a lot of despair and passion among not only those who are fighting, but those back at home that have had to suffer great losses and do without and have lost loved ones. And the landscape of Britain has changed forever because of what has happened. No one has been able to kind of escape that. The men have truly suffered. The men on the battlefields have truly suffered. And almost when the armistice is signed, it's like they can't even believe that it is over. And so that is what this poem is about, kind of the years that they had been immersed in this, and then the end of it, and then can you pick up and can you return to the life that you had before, knowing that everything was going to be different. So let's take a look. Stanza 1, there had been years of passion, scorching cold, and much despair and anger, heaving high, care whitely watching, sorrows manifold, among the young, among the weak and old, and the pensive spirit of pity whispered, why? So I love that we have that emphasis on those emotions: passion capitalized, despair, anger, care, sorrow, spirit of pity. Okay, so this is the general sense of the times that people are living in. They're running through the gamut of all of these emotions. So these years were not easy. They were not, and then they were also not one singular thing. There were times of passion, there were times of despair, times of anger, times of sorrow, times of care, all these things, a mix of emotions that were felt intensely and passionately, so much so that he gives them that capital letter, like, which gives them a sense of agency, which means that they kind of take on a persona of their own, almost like they're some kind of human, a conscious being that was able to kind of influence the lives of men and women, passion, despair, anger, care, sorrows. No matter what emotions were felt, sorrow was manifold, meaning it was everywhere and just rolling over and over. And anger was heaving high. All ages, all races, all genders asked why. Why? How had we gotten to this place in this state, and what can we do to kind of remedy that? Men had not paused to answer. Foes distraught pierced the thinned peoples in a brute-like blindness, philosophies that sages long had taught, and selflessness were as an unknown thought, and hell and shell were yapped at loving kindness. So the question that was asked in the first stanza, why, is again referenced here in this second set of lines. We have the men who were at the heart of these emotions, the men being the ones that were fighting. They had not paused to answer the question why, right? They heard the calling, they accepted the call, and they did what they had to do to survive. There was not time to figure out why they were forced to participate in this war, because the horror of it was on them immediately. They lived inside of it, and it was all around them. So these things were common in the days before the end of the war. There were endless foes who pierced the thinned people. There was always an enemy to be fought, someone who was trying their best to do damage against people who were thinned, both physically and in number. So the physical changes it had taken on their bodies, and the fact that it was eliminating people en masse, so the population was also thinned. There was no selflessness to be found in Europe, but plenty of shouts of hell and shell, and these words were as common as words of love, like love and kindness had once been. The feeble folk at home had grown full used to dugouts, snipers, Huns, from the war adept in the morning's herd, and at evetides perused, to day-dreamt men in millions when they mused, to nightmare men in millions when they slept. So this is like the people at home, right? It is how uncommon words which people would not have known before, like dugouts and snipers and the Huns. People at home, the feeble folk, the ones that were not the ones that were fighting, were using these terms like fully in their homes. They knew what they were. Everybody felt all the emotions of the war, right? Everybody was immersed in the war, even if they weren't physically doing the fighting. And that meant that every aspect of every day of their lives centered around this war. Like they had no time to think of anything else. In the morning, from the morning to the evening, the evetides, they had emotions and news and speculations and worry and all these things that consumed them. So the men on the front made up an important part of that speculation. During the day, one might daydream about a time when the war was over and the men could come home. To daydreamt men in millions when they mused, to nightmare men in millions when they slept. So these dreams of them being able to come home in the evening, these daydreams, they turned into nightmares, right? They weren't given a reprieve from their situation morning to night. The war was happening all the time, every day. In stanza 4, waking to wish existence timeless, null, Sirius they watched above where armies fell. He seemed to check his flapping when in the lull of a night a boom came thence-wise, like the dull plunge of a stone dropped into some deep well. So the fourth stanza picks up where the third stanza leaves off. The men on the battlefields are pulled between a wish for two different types of existence, right? In an effort to escape the world that they were living in. So, in an effort to escape from the world that they were living in, they might wish for there to be no end to time, no death in the future. Or they might have wished for time to be null, which is for everything to end at that very moment. So, wanting to live or wanting to die to escape from what they are living through. Sirius here is kind of a play on words. It is referencing the star, but they also watched with serious faces too. So kind of maybe a play there too as well. But Sirius is a presence that they see all the time. They often paid attention to it. It was there when armies fell. The constellation, which is also known as Canis Major, it's the dog in the sky. It's a large dog-like image. He stopped his flapping or his moving about when there was a lull in the action. So this constellation, it seems, knew not to trust, just like the soldiers knew not to trust silence. The lull was only a warning for some stone to drop into some deep well. So that even the constellation above knew when that a lull in the action was not prolonged, right? It was a plunge that preceded destruction. In stanza 5, so when the old hopes that the earth was bettering slowly were dead and damned, there sounded, "War is done, one morrow," said the bereft and meek and lowly. "Will men some day be given to grace, yea, holy, and in good sooth, as our dreams used to run." So we got to turn in his tone, turn in the history of World War I here. It's the end of the war. And I hope that men will be given to grace. So this, these signs of peace only come after all their old hopes and everything that the earth was, their old world had died, right? Once all hope for the future was exhausted, the cries went out, "War is done," which spurns further speculation about how men will be in the future. Can they even recover from this? Can they even get back to a semblance of their old lives? Breathless, they paused. Out there, men raised their glance to where had stood those poplars lank and lopped, as they had raised it through the 4 years' dance of death in the now familiar flats of France, and murmured, "Strange this, how all firing stopped." It's almost like they're unable to believe that it's happening, right? They pause and they wait for the other shoe to fall, for the other stone to drop. They raise their eyes that used to be filled with trees, these fields of trees, but now they're filled with death. But there is no sound. All the firing has stopped. It is the end, and now they can leave these familiar flats to go home. All was hushed. The about to fire fired not. The aimed at moved away in trance-lipped song. One checkless regiment slung a clenching shot and turned. The spirit of irony smirked out what? Spoil peradventures woven of rage and wrong. So there in stanza 7, the end was so hard for them to comprehend that no one can speak. They're tight-lipped. They're hushed. All was hushed. The front is quiet. And all those who are about to fire their guns fired not. They stopped. Everyone moved away from the battles in a trance, except for one regiment one checklist regiment, it says. And we'll pick up there with our final screencast, part 3, in the next video.